Joyce Ogden Professor of Art at Spalding University and the Kentucky School of Art and Design at Spalding. I want to give you a little bit of background about what brought us here today before I introduce Margo Sawyer. A couple of years ago, President Tory Merton McClure asked me to lead the process in finding an artist to create a commemorative sculpture in honor of Mother Catherine Spalding to be located in what has become the new center of the campus, Catherine Spalding Square on Breckenridge Street, which is shown behind us here. As our discussions evolved, it became clear that we were not looking to create a representational figurative sculpture of Catherine Spalding, but rather something that reflects and represents her legacy, spirit, and accomplishments. For those of you who may not know much about Catherine Spalding, I'd like to share a little bit about her history. She was a pioneer, a leader. Born in Maryland in 1793, she was motherless at the age of 4, orphaned at the age of 10. This most likely informed her understanding of those who were in need. She was a natural-born leader, and at the age of 19, she left Maryland to answer a call by the Vincentians to educate young females on the Kentucky frontier who were not permitted to attend school with males. This move in 1812 led her to become a founding member of the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth, where she was elected by her peers to lead the formation of this new religious community. She maintained her role as leader within the order, as well as the greater community, until her death in 1858. Catherine Spalding's legacy is an important part of the history of women's work in this country. She was compassionate, energetic, intelligent, and an exceptional leader in the founding of schools, hospitals, private health care, and social services at a time when the Kentucky frontier was in its infancy. Catherine Spalding and the early sisters were educational pioneers, initially starting schools in Nazareth and later in Louisville. But the sisters always focused on meeting the needs of the time and caring for the poor of all ages, the sick, prisoners, and orphans. Spalding University, initially Catherine Spalding College, was founded by the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth in 1920 and named after Mother Catherine Spalding. While Spalding is not one of the many schools founded by Mother Catherine, it has its roots in the Bardstown Mother House, or Mother House campus, which in addition to Nazareth Academy was home to Nazareth Junior College in 1921, and later a four-year college in 1938. I hope I have that right. In 1920, a four-year college was opened in Louisville, and the two campuses merged in 1969 as Catherine Spalding College. Through its mission, Spalding University devotes itself and its programs to acting in the spirit of Mother Catherine Spalding, a true Kentucky pioneer who met the needs of the time wherever they were. With the heritage to recognize, which is so rich and deep, we didn't come to a decision about how to approach this commission quickly or easily. Along the way, I had the pleasure of consulting with several local arts leaders and curators about an appropriate process and potential artists. After careful thought and discussion, we decided to make this an invitational by seeking 3 artists who we felt approached her work in a way that would honor Catherine Spalding's legacy. It was also important that the commission would go to a female artist with respect for the leadership and accomplishments of Catherine Spalding. At this stage, the artists will not be presenting proposals for an artwork on campus. They are coming to share past work, ideas, and processes. Margo Sawyer is launching this series with her presentation today. Tomorrow, she will spend time on campus getting better acquainted with the site, our campus, and community. After each artist has visited, we will identify one artist to invite back to design the final work. Before I introduce Margo Sawyer, I'd like to ask President Tory Merton McClure to come up.
I'm gonna steal that. I hope I have that right. Because I was giving remarks in Nazareth and I was quoting from books written by the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth about their history, and afterwards 3 or 4 sisters came up and told me I had it wrong. So I hope I have that right. I'm going to use that. So in true Spalding fashion, we had some donors who really gave money intending to do a statue of Mother Catherine, and Joyce suggested that that was so, I don't know, not avant-garde, and that we should think of something more interesting and more, Mother Catherine-like. And so we are along for the ride and excited about where it might take us.
Okay, so let me introduce Margo Sawyer. Margo Sawyer was born in the United States and brought up in England, where she received most of her formal education. Sawyer studied foundation at the Brighton Polytechnic Faculty of Art and Design. She then received a BA honors degree from the Chelsea School of Art in London. Her interest in contemporary American art led her back to the United States. She attended the sculpture program at Yale University and received an MFA in 1982. Throughout her career, Sawyer has created installations which translate the notion of ancient sacred space into a contemporary vocabulary, which we'll be hearing about tonight. She is particularly interested in relationships between the experience of space and the experience of transcendence, and the ways in which the architectural and ritual converge to create a forum for contemplation and reflection. Recently, Sawyer's practice has focused on creating large-scale, often public installations that combine her parallel interests in art and architecture. Her work has been exhibited both nationally in New York, Los Angeles, New Haven, Houston, Dallas, Austin, and internationally in the United Kingdom, Italy, India, and Japan. She's represented by the Holly Johnson Gallery in Dallas, Texas. In addition to her career as an artist, Sawyer is a professor of sculpture studio art in the MFA program at the University of Texas, Austin. Okay. Please welcome.
It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. This is a very exciting opportunity for all of you, and I feel honored to be on the list. And I have gathered together way too many slides, so I will not talk about individual things. I'll talk about things in concepts and ideas and sort of go through pieces and move fairly quickly. And I'm going to turn my timer on just so that I... this is sort of a signature work of mine. It's called Synchronicity of Color. It was made in 2008 for the city of Houston, and it has become the icon for the city. I had no idea when I made it that it would become an icon, but in fact it is a beloved thing. And one of my students said, "Hey, there's Margo at weloveyou.com or something," and it was this website where people are getting engaged, they're getting married, they're football teams and quinceañera groups, and it's become, everybody wants to stand in front of this piece and have their photograph taken. And it is truly a delight to know that, not my intention, but in fact some of the work that an artist does sort of has a sort of resonance and legacy. And this piece is called Synchronicity of Color, and I've just recently have been embracing this, Catherine Spalding, in a way we sort of know her because of her heritage, and she was, young, alone, early, and I myself also was young, alone, early, and when my parents married, it was, they probably could have gotten in jail. My mother was from England, my father was from America, an Afro-American, a British white woman. And it turns out, years later, I've sort of found more legacy about my father, because he died when I was very young. My grandfather started NAACP in Topeka, Kansas, and then initiated Brown versus the Board of Education. That school was 1 block away from where I lived, or where they lived. And my father's father was a very famous Afro-American painter called Aaron Douglas. And I've sort of been because my father died so young and I grew up in England, I really haven't known too much about this history. And just recently, I was asked to be in an Afro-American international diaspora fair in Miami, and I'll sort of end with that. But when I was asked, I said, when you see me, I look like a nice Jewish girl from Queens, but I have a really good legacy, or heritage rather. But synchronicity of color, really, I call it a quilt of color. And it really is sort of an indirect sort of homage to my multicultural background, but also to our whole world's multicultural background. And you'll see that my work is really, have never really addressed my ethnic origin, my complexity. However, I think metaphorically the work sort of speaks of it in very sort of subtle ways. And so, the way that I'm beginning this talk is really sort of look at what started my interest in being a sculptor. And my mother was, I think, a spy, and she hated Christmas, we hated Christmas, and we would go anywhere in the world not to celebrate, and one of the places that we went to when I was 14 was to Egypt, and it was during the 1973 war. And similar to the wars that are going on right now, and we were the only 17 tourists in the country. We were the only 17 tourists for the whole time I was there. And I was completely floored by these amazing, structures that were sculpture, they were architecture, and they were painting, and they embraced all those worlds. And really, that experience at 14 years old really sort of cemented to me, this is what my vocation, I want to become a sculptor. And I was fortunate, that was the one thing I was really good at. I was terrible at English, terrible at math, they plague me now every day. I have to do lots of math and lots of English. But these are very early works of the Chelsea School of Art, and so trying to look at carving and at making and at sweeping and drawing, and looking towards the sort of process art. I was in London in the 1970s, and of course Spiral Jetty had recently come of age, and sort of looking towards America, looking towards American art. And my interest in American art brought me to want to come back to America. I grew up in England, and my formative years were in England, and then I came to Yale to do graduate work. And I decided that I would stop making, I was really good at drawing, terrible at making sculpture, and I wanted to work with color, and red seemed to be, red sort of like blood, this is glass, and you have this corporal relationship when you see these pieces, because your body feels the material. And a lot of people would get very nervous standing around this, well, rightfully so, because it collapsed at one point. It's, very much this work was looking at painting, but yet trying to create these sort of almost like sculptures or installations as if they were drawing, wanting to make something much more immediate. And my interest in sort of growing up in a agnostic family, I was terrified of religion, but fascinated by religion. And I wanted to find out more, and I got Fulbright to go to India. And there I spent time looking at temples, and looking at rituals, and looking at the wonderful plethora of life in India, and created these works that were kind of an homage to the death of both my parents, which happened when I was quite young, and again, sort of a male and a female, a black and white, sort of looking to that work. And this sort of work, this was made at the American Academy in Rome, and kind of revisits that same sort of figurative, abstracted figure forms that are almost like drawings, but sort of hang in space and sort of hang above you. I've always been fascinated more particularly with abstraction as opposed to figuration. And and also with mathematics. So this is sort of a fractal mathematics system. It's called vessels. And my time in India, I would, with the mandalas, the sand mandalas that you would see, and how things, the sort of ephemerality. So something is here momentarily, and then it gets destroyed, and then gets recreated. And a real love of looking at really beautiful, exquisite things, and many, many parts that create a whole. So in India, one of the two, this is sort of like probably one of my favorite spaces, this place on the left, on your left. It's a mound, and the mound is of a lotus, and in this temple, it's a very small temple, and you're forced to sort of walk and step onto the mound when you walk in. And in Indian iconography, the deity is always on a lotus, and these worshippers, when they would walk on that thing, would momentarily become a deity. And the sort of transitions of sacred space is something that's been really important to me, and sort of inching my way into investigating what that might be. On the right is in South India, there's the women every morning, they sweep their front steps, and then they make these mandalas to sanctify their home, and then during the day they get destroyed, and then they do the same thing all over again. So the sort of ephemerality and the sort of where is the sacred, where is the profane, where is the mundane, and the places and spaces that I have experienced have really influenced the work. So this is the city of Jodhpur, and I made this piece sort of inspired by it called Blue. And blue is of these thousands of pieces of wood that are painted this sort of similar blue to Jodhpur, and then they kind of pour out all over the floor and kind of create almost like a mosaic on the floor. And that work is definitely sort of quoted in the very first piece that I showed you. So how, as an artist who does installations, who does studio work, how does an artist sort of transition into making public artwork? And often it's through sort of indirect ways. And I'm sort of fascinated by the East, and I got a Fulbright and a Japan Foundation grant to go to Japan. And there I studied the gardens. And these gardens are, this garden is probably 1800s. I should know the date, I don't. But abstract sculpture was never even a lingering thought in the West, and yet in the ancient world it was celebrated and created and made to be contemplative spaces. These gardens were made to be spaces that you would sort of look on and into. And you walk around these spaces and you sort of look, and it's really about wanting to have a place for your mind. And I think that sort of contemplative quality is something that I'm always trying to get in my work. This is my favorite temple, and it's called Tofukuji. And a lot of these dry gardens, they're made in such a way that they're symbolic of the sea, and the rocks are symbolic of the islands around Japan. And so kind of encapsulating the essence of the Japanese land and sea culture, but yet in this very abstract way. And the garden, as you walk around it, there's this a later garden, which was done in the 1930s, with all these blocks of shapes. So while I was in Japan, I became obsessed with pachinko balls. I don't know if any of you know what pachinko is, but it's this vertical pinball machine, and it's a gambling thing. And I would find one on the road almost every day, and I put it in my pocket. And every day that I found one, I would say it was a lucky day. And I amassed quite a few. And it was the 50th anniversary of Fulbright, and I convinced them that they should give me a solo show in Tokyo, and I wanted to work with pachinko balls, which the Fulbright, many of you, most of you may, some of you may, some may not, It's sort of hallowed ground for academia, but I was a young, just tenured professor, but I wanted to borrow these or use these balls that in pachinko parlors in Japan, they're primarily, it's thought of as a gambling place, and the people that run them are called the Yakuza. So I wanted Fulbright to partner with the mafia in Tokyo, and they were not very forthcoming. And then the American embassy was like, yes, we want that to happen because it's going to be so great. You're going to have the artists, you're going to have the pachinko yakuzas, you're going to have all those professors, and then you're going to have all the dignitaries. It's going to be just a hoot. And sure enough, at the opening, everybody came scripted to scale. So one of the other things is, we all played with blocks as kids. We all, and I have this photograph of me, I tried to find it, but I couldn't, of me with my cats with bricks, as a little kid. I feel like I'm doing the same thing that I did as a child, yet it's serious play. And so these installations, I bring way too many pieces with me, and then I sort of compose. A lot of the colors from this work was from Shinto Buddhism, so the colors that they use in their, and then this is the final installation. There were 1 million pachinko balls, which was like having a ton of money on the floor, and tatami mats, and you would take off your shoes and sort of sit in repose and kind of look. So kind of making this my own Zen garden. A friend of mine, a Japanese artist, he said, you've done this amazing thing because you've united the East and the West. You've brought pachinko parlors are noisy, they're smoky, they're horrible, and yet you've made this tranquil, beautiful, contemplative space with this material that we don't really think of as being sacred. And it was a sort of a life-changing moment. I'd used color before, but I'd never used an array of color. And from this piece, I started, when I returned back to America, I started applying for public art projects, and I was awarded a really big one in Austin. And when I got it, I made this silly drawing of like little pieces of tape on a piece of paper, and then, ooh, now I've got to make it. How do I do that? And then what I was inspired by were these blocks of color. And then the other thing about this work is it's chaos theory, fractal theory in the making. So wherever there's a box, it changes the mathematical order of how the ball bearings sit and nest. And if you can remember that image, at the very end, the piece I just did in Miami this December sort of quotes this image, but in sort of a two-dimensional form. So yeah, again, the things I see, this is from South India, just sort of etched in my mind. And then this was, when I did this big commission for the city of Austin, I had all these hundreds of boxes sort of sitting on my studio floor, and I ganged them all together and took this picture. Little did I know, that was probably 1998,